Hello there everyone, my name's Colin, welcome to Onion Skin, and Adobe Animate CC is now upon us. Everyone is wondering, how does it compare to its previous incarnations, and of course, how does it compare to Toon Boom? You will have noticed upon clicking this video that this is going to be a long one, a really long one. I've been working on this since Adobe Animate CC first came out, and there is so much to talk about. For those who frequent my videos, you probably know that I tend to release the longer tutorials somewhat episodically, but because this is quite relevant news, I believe it was important to get all of it out to you as quickly as possible. So here it all is in one huge chunk. If you turn your direction to the description below, you'll notice a chapter select is there. So you may want to return to this video and kind of chip away at it over a period of time. So I personally thank you for your patience, and I hope you get something out of today's video. Now, for those who are late to this news, Adobe Animate CC is the answer and the successor to Adobe Flash Professional, which has been the kingpin and the main player for online animation for probably the last 20 years, like a stupidly long time. And the name has now bitten the dust while the program lives on. The reason for this is a very important one, and that is Flash's reputation had been progressively declining over many years. The focus of development was heavily skewed, and some believe the last very good version of Flash to be Macromedia Flash MX, or Flash Professional 7. It came out in 2004. That's over 10 years ago now. In order to have something that runs that, you often need to keep an old computer around, and there are many who do just that. So what was Adobe doing over the course of that 10 years? Features were getting added and moved around, which frankly, not many people really seemed to care about, and Flash users felt neglected. There were times where Adobe had attempted to add some things for animators, but it was always very lazy, clumsy if you will, and no accountability for improvement. A prime example of this would be the bone tool. A bone rigging option was added back in CS4, but its use was so limited and essentially broken that animators quickly abandoned it after giving it a chance. Personally, I remained hopeful that because it was a new feature, it simply needed a bit more time to iron out the kinks and eventually could be quite a useful option. However, the next version came along and nothing had been improved. Eventually the tool was simply scrapped entirely. What? A slightly different example was the continued ignorance of the developers towards the community. Flash users pleaded for years about important additions that were never to come. Things like a camera or the ability to export as video. Now the option to export as video was there, but it was always completely broken. Like, stupidly broken. Because it simply didn't work. Symbols wouldn't appear, audio would fall out of sync, frames would skip, just to name a few of the problems which led to the universal opinion of just don't ever export as video. We had to stick with SWF, and even those could have their problems unless you knew what you were doing. It wasn't until only a few years ago that community members from Newgrounds successfully banded together to make the first reliable SWF to video converter. And because many of us were just kids, I guess we just accepted the world for the way it was and didn't really think, hang on, not being able to export as video is probably the dumbest thing ever. And for 10 years to go past without it getting repaired is even dumber than the dumbest thing ever. It doesn't take too long for Flash users to get tired of this and start working their way around these problems themselves. It got so bad to the point that entire workflows would be based on workarounds. Animators kept a variety of tricks up their sleeve to fool Flash into doing what they really wanted it to do. A camera was added as a third-party tool by literally coding a rectangle onto the stage to act as a viewfinder. Meanwhile, the official updates were adding just things like a vine generator. What is this? This is one of the reasons I personally bailed on Flash and moved over to Toon Boom. I quickly realized just how neglected I'd been for years. I was introduced to an interface that had features that were clearly there because animators had gotten in touch with the developers and had their suggestions added to the program. And common sense just existed everywhere. It was so nice. But now, something rather incredible has happened. It seems like Adobe is at last hearing the plea and getting their act together. The rebranding of Flash to Animate CC is not just a name, a statement, a declaration, if you will, that they are now catering this program towards us, animators, people who wish to create in a visual way. Pretty much all of the new features coming out in this version are catered directly towards animators, and this time around, unlike a Vine drawing tool, they are actually useful. But what direction is this software now taking? Well, the honest truth is that the direction this program is taking is to be more like Toon Boom. All of the great new features added to Animate CC are things that Toon Boom has had for years and years. Now, this is a good thing. This is a very good thing, because they are good features, and frankly, Flash should have had these years and years ago as well. Now, I see no point in slandering Flash for what appears to be copying these features, because frankly, it doesn't matter. Maybe they copied it, maybe it's a coincidence, who cares? The reality of the matter is that these are features Flash needs if it wishes to continue. After all, can you imagine how rotten things would be if Android was not allowed to add multi-touch, or iPhones were not allowed to add a notifications panel? So in this head-to-head review, we're going to be having a look at a lot of the new features that Animate has introduced, and we're going to compare that to the Toon Boom counterpart, and we can get a feel for the direction Animate is going and how it is performing at this time. It's also been a long time since I've used the Flash platform, so I'm going to explore a bunch of the other more general features as well, and kind of just compare the two programs across the board. I haven't really done that before, and I think it's something a lot of viewers would be highly interested in. Now, I'm going to try and be as objective as possible, and just lay it on the line as to which is doing better at particular tasks, and where things are continuing to struggle. There may be some bias from me towards Toon Boom, I'll try not to, but in researching this review, it may come across that way, even though I'm trying not to be. To begin, I'm more than likely to confuse myself from time to time because there's so many names to remember. We are looking at two different softwares today that over the past 12 months have had two different names each. It gets all the more confusing when they have in fact shared a name. So when I say Flash, I am of course referring to what is now Adobe Animate CC. And if I say Harmony, I am of course talking about the product Toon Boom Harmony. Now where this gets a bit confusing is that only about a year ago at time of recording, the name Animate was the name of a Toon Boom software. There was indeed Toon Boom Animate and Toon Boom Animate Pro. No doubt there are many people watching who are still using one of those two pieces of software. But Toon Boom decided to drop the name and unify everything with the term Toon Boom Harmony, and I guess Adobe probably just scooped that right on up. So now it's no longer Adobe Flash, but indeed Adobe Animate. But Toon Boom Animate and Adobe Animate are certainly not the same thing. The similarities are in name only, I can assure you, as we are about to find out. But if you are still using Toon Boom Animate or Animate Pro, I am demonstrating with Harmony 12, but the similarities are vast. There are some visual differences, as you'll notice the screen is darker than it used to be, but try the things out that I described for yourself and see if it happens to be there or not. But I do have a variety of other videos that talk about the differences between the different Toon Boom versions and how things have changed from the Animate and Animate Pro days to the more current Harmony days. So I guess I could give you a TLDR right at the beginning. Is Adobe Animate CC better than Flash? Yes. Very much so. Is it better than Toon Boom Harmony? No. Very much not so. No, not so. Let's dive into the nitty-gritty. We have a lot to get through and a lot of things I want to show. So we're going to start with some of the new Flash additions and see what they've added for us. I planned for the overall structure of this very large video to be a combination of comparing the brand new additions to Adobe Animate with their Toon Boom counterpart, but also just an overall view. We're going to be looking at a number of features which have been there since the dawn of time. Of course, we won't get a chance to get through everything, but I'll try and cover as much as I can. Now remember, as I explore these features and check it all out. I do have quite an extensive history with both of these programs. I spent many years with Flash, and now I've spent many years with Toon Boom as well. So I know my way around both. Animate probably has changed quite a bit, so there may be a number of buttons that I don't know where they are now. But of course, I'll state that and I'll give it the benefit of the doubt if I'm leading myself astray. If so, say so in the comments, and then if you scroll through the comments and you see something that I've missed or I've gotten wrong and someone else has corrected me on, vote that thing up. And if enough of those corrections happen, or if enough contributions from viewers happen, then I'll probably do a follow-up video going into a bit more depth on some things and righting some wrongs. Because, you know, I want to be fair to both programs and both give them a proper fighting chance. So first things first, hello Flash old friend, it has been a long time. You have a new name, and as far as I can tell, a new interface. How long does it look like this? I think it looks really nice. But we are not here to discuss aesthetics. How good can it animate? Okay, so the first thing I want to show off is the new onion skinning. This is probably the feature that has the most Adobe Animate users really excited, because now it has a colored onion skin. So do you see on the bracket here, this one is lit up blue and this one is lit up green. Sorry about that. There's likely going to be a couple of times when I refer to the color blue and you will very clearly see purple. That's something to do with the combination of my tablet and recording software. So I'm going to create some blank keyframes in here and kind of just go through with my brush and just go bam, 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 bam. And you see the blue and green brackets here have influenced with the red and has created this colored onion skin either side. So I can now see where I have come from and where I am going. This is a huge step forward, as before it was just monochrome color fading out the further away it went. And I believe users have been asking for this for donkey's years, and finally it's here, which is great. Now, how does this compare to the Toon Boom version? So with the onion skin turned on, I'm also going to go stroke, 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 just as we did there. And you can see it is also colored either side. So that's good. It works the same with the bracket and all that. However, the one up that Animate has is the colored brackets on either side. So if you ever forget which way's which, it's right there on the timeline. So that's really nice. Harmony does not have that. And I have sometimes forgotten, is it red or is it green that is forwards? A trick was pointed out to me recently, which I thought was a really cool one. Simply, red is stop, green is go. And so you know green is forwards. So that's quite nice. Hopefully I won't get as stumped anymore. But the thing that Harmony has over Animate is that this isn't the only onion skin button. The button also exists on the layer itself. So this means if I add in a bunch of layers, let's do some down this way, and I'll do some across here as well. So now I've got a whole bunch of strokes that all animate along as they do. Each one is on their own layer, and you'll notice the onion skin button doesn't just exist here, but down each layer as well. And I can activate each one of these independently of one another and not get distracted. You may have also noticed, however, that for each one I'm turning on and off, this one down here is also keeping its onion skin no matter what. And that's because when any onion skin layer is turned on, it is also going to show the current selected drawing layer. See, I'm scrolling through there and it is showing what we're currently focused on. So that could be a pro or a con depending on your point of view. I think it's a good thing because it means you don't need to be constantly managing what's going on down here. You can just have your drawing layer selected, pop that on, and see the onion skin of what you're intending to. So I think this is a great feature because then, you know, as you pile on the drawings and the characters, it's very rare that you want to see the onion skin for an entire project. You just want to see it for what you're currently drawing so you can get on with the task at hand. So all in all, the addition of colored onion skin on Animate is a wonderful thing, but it isn't quite up to scratch on what Toon Boom has to offer yet. But huge props for this because it isn't broken. It does exactly what it says it'll do, because unfortunately that isn't the case for some of the other things that have been included. I'd essentially summarize the Adobe Animate experience so far as it's good, but... And I guess you'll see what I mean as we dive a little bit deeper. So the next thing I want to show off is the turntable. This is a really nice feature that programs like Photoshop have had for a long time. Harmony's one works like so. You hold down the command and the option key and this animator's disc appears and you can wheel it all around. If you have a trackpad, you can also set it up in preferences to do the whole spinny spin and zoom thing, and it will always rotate from the center of the viewfinder. See how the circle is always appearing in the middle of the screen and then rotating the screen around that point. Now, the Animate version works in a very similar way, but it rotates around the cursor. So that's pretty cool. I don't think one is better or worse than the other there. You know, they both do the job. It doesn't really matter how something spins because you want something upside down, you're getting it upside down. But there is one fatal flaw. On the most part, rotate works great, unless you're working with 3D space. So I'll come back to show what I'm talking about there, but it segues me nicely into talking about 3D space. Now, it is something that isn't brand new to the Animate lineup. It's been here since Flash CS4, and I'm not sure if it's really seen any improvements since then, unfortunately. It's a really cool idea, but it doesn't really work very well for anything other than very simple parallax. So I'll show you what I mean. Here's two shapes across two layers, right? So I suppose I should rename them to make it easier for us to look at. Red and blue, okay? Blue layer, red layer. Blue is laid above red and hence it appears above red. Now this is the 3D motion tool, you can select it there. First things first, I need to convert both of these shapes to a symbol. Red circle and blue circle. Okay, now with this shape selected, you see the arrows appear, X, Y, and Z. So that comes towards camera, and you can see as I move it around now, it moves faster than my cursor because it is closer to the camera. That is a good thing, but when I move it back, now remember when I drew these circles, they were approximately, similar sizes. So this means this circle is now physically, in three-dimensional space, further away than the red circle is. But it still appears to be in front of the red one because it is layered in front of the red one. This sucks. It essentially defeats the purpose of using 3D space at all for me, and I think it's the same for a lot of Flash animators. They were excited when the feature appeared, they used it once or twice, and then never touched it again. Now, of course, 3D space is probably one of the main calling cards that Harmony users like to boast about when talking to Flash animators, as it's something quite different. But it depends on the kind of animation that you do. Maybe you never need 3D space, but anyway, I'll quickly demonstrate it. So same thing, here's a blue circle, and on another layer, I'll add in a red circle. I'll do the same thing, just name them real quick. Blue, turn them on and off. Okay, yep, they are indeed the right layers. Red is currently on top as it is on the upper layer. In layer properties, you do need to convert every drawing you do into a 3D layer, so it will be treated as such. So red and blue are now activated as 3D layers. And now with the transform tool on, you can go to the top view and look down at the whole project file and push it back in 3D space. And you can see as it passes through the blue circle, it does treat it as it would in 3D space. On top of this, it's much easier to navigate a three-dimensional working field in the Toon Boom environment. You not only get the top and side views, but if you're using Harmony Premium, you also have access to the perspective view, which gives you a full three-dimensional field to work with. This makes parallaxing and stuff like that a piece of cake, but it also allows you to go one step further by actually by fully rotating these shapes in 3D as well. Now, the lower versions of Harmony don't let you do this. You can only move shapes in 3D. They will always be facing the camera, right? You can't spin them. Animate, however, you can spin them. Regardless of the depth being broken, you can rotate it. So you see the blue circle is now rotated downwards and the red circle is now rotated sideways. Now, Harmony Essentials and Advanced, the two, lower consumer end versions can't do this. It's always facing the camera. So rotating fully like this is exclusive to Harmony Premium, but Adobe Animate can do it in the baseline. So that is pretty cool. Now this is when I wanted to come back to talking about the rotating canvas, right? Doing this thing, the whole rotating stuff. Because don't do it if you're going to work with 3D. Why? This is why. What is happening? All I'm doing is rotating the canvas. We're just looking at it from a different viewpoint. The drawing should just be rotating, but they're being cut away. The red one is shrinking. If I go too far and actually flip it upside down, the images are now reversed. This is bizarre. If you select them with the selection tool, we can see a little bit more of what's happening. As it rotates outside of the bounding box, it becomes invisible to us. This is whack. I'm not sure how it got by testing, if it was never tested or they were hoping that no one would notice it because not many people animate in 3D, but still this is a pretty massive oversight. I can only assume that now that Adobe is getting their act together and they're wanting to improve this program for the better, we will see a fix for it, and hopefully we'll see True 3D come into it as well. A perspective view, or at least a top and side view would make three-dimensional space worthwhile in Animate. So for a lot of the errors that I'm going to be pointing out, I am hoping that a fix is on the way. I want to give Adobe the benefit of the doubt with a lot of this stuff because of the whole movement with the rebranding and just, them saying that they're getting in touch with animators and wanting to cater it towards animators. But again, this did, it's happened before. When Adobe first bought Flash from Macromedia, the first version under Adobe that came out was CS3, and that version wasn't very different from the Macromedia one. It essentially just was under the Adobe aesthetic. It had an interface and a look that resembled Photoshop and Illustrator and all those programs. The main feature they added was ActionScript 3, which was a pretty good add. CS4 was when they really started adding stuff. They put in bones, they put in the 3D space, and a bunch of other things as well. And pretty much all of these add-ons were fundamentally broken. I mentioned before, a lot of animators were very excited for these additions, realized they weren't very useful, and then just continued to use Flash as they had in years past. We hoped that they would get fixed, but they never were. Some of them stayed busted, as this one has for years and years, and nothing's been done. Other features were removed again entirely, so I am really hoping that this time Adobe gets it and any broken stuff like this will get fixed. Other things like a camera is still not there. We need to use VCam, which is a community-built coded camera. I am going to almost assume that a camera will get added to Animate in the future, but if it doesn't, I think that's lost a lot of people's trust once and for all. I'll certainly be very, very disappointed because here I am anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. So 3D Space was a bit of a sidestep because they weren't advertising that in the new version, but I thought it was worth talking about because the rotating canvas is a new version, and I thought I'd better point out where it works and where it doesn't. Both programs have a way of resetting the rotation back to normal, and in pretty similar places as well. You can see in Harmony it is on the bottom lower left. Hit that and it rotates back to normal. There is also a shortcut of just hitting Shift-C, and Animate has it up in the top right. And I don't know if there's a shortcut. So far it doesn't seem like there is. Now, the next big add-on is tagged swatches. This is an awesome add-on. Again, one that Toon Boom has had for a long time, and what it is it allows you to save colors and then you can update them later. You make a character a certain color, you animate 500 frames of them, realize it's the wrong color, you can update it in one click and it's all good. This is quite an expansive feature. We may spend quite a bit of time on it. So let's see how it works. When you open up the palette, we are greeted with the good old-fashioned Macromedia version, which we all know and love, but there is now a new section down the bottom called Tagged Swatches. So I'm going to pop out of there and go over to this version, the swatches panel in there. The tagged swatches are here so we can build up a little library and keep it all managed. When I first opened up this, I noticed something very, very odd. Don't resize this panel because it gets really whack. Ugh. This is not okay. This is Flash CS4. Here is the swatches panel. As I expand it, it gets bigger, but it stays in line. This column here has all the primary colors and that, and it's separated from the main collection by these two black strips. But technically they aren't actually black strips, they are just more black swatches, just to give it a bit of a divide. So why this is an issue is now that it's all spread out, you can see it's just scattered more black swatches all throughout the list. And it's, you know, why? Why is it like this? I'm being nitpicky, but still, come on. So putting in a new red shape here, I can select that. And this button down here appears saying convert to tag swatch. Select that, it brings up a Photoshop style color picker, confirms the color that I have selected, hit OK, and it appears down in our new tag swatches panel. So where this is special is I can double tap to open that up and select a new color. And when you hit OK, you see it gets updated. So this is a very, very cool feature. And it's interesting that it has both, you know, the tag swatches area and the classical one as well. Because, as you can see here, the Harmony one doesn't. It doesn't have the regular color palette. Every swatch you make is a tag swatch no matter what. So you can see there is a red one by default. I can color something red. And if I open it up, again, you get a Photoshop style color picker and I can change its color. Now, the first thing you'll notice is the colors updating live. So I can scroll through and just kind of choose it there. So that's very nice and definitely a one-up over the Animate version. You can also name these ones. So what if I was to call this shirt or hair and stuff like that? I'm pretty sure you can name these ones as well, because it's just called my color at the moment. So there you go, open it up. I can call that one shirt as well. So they both can be names like that. It doesn't seem like the name actually appears next to it though. I have to roll over it to see it. So that's kind of a shame. Unless of course there's a button that I don't know about. The Harmony version, it appears in a list, but there's also an option down here that allows you to view as a swatch mode. So you can see now the names are inside the swatch itself. And as I pack this up, it goes grid-like. So the fact that Animate has the classical swatch panel and that Harmony doesn't, I'm completely undecided as to which version is better. I really think this will come down to personal taste and preference and really what you get used to. Personally, I'm more on the side that having both versions is probably just going to add to confusion, because what if you do start animating or coloring something using these and then you do need to update it? Well, you're screwed because it wasn't a tag swatch to begin with, it was a classical one. Whereas in Harmony, you can be assured that everything will be a tag swatch all the time. However, the disadvantage of that means, you know, there's an extra layer of organization. Every time you want to make a new color, you have to create a new one, you have to open it up, you have to choose it that way, and then it will be saved there. So there's more organization involved. It may take a little bit more time to initially set up, but personally in the long run, I think this is more to your advantage because you're future-proofed. Okay, so moving on, the other big advantage of the tag swatch system across both programs is being able to have full character palettes. You can see this shape here, which is currently named Palette 1. And the same symbol appears down here. So I can tap that and you see a new palette appears. So now I can have a second character or indeed, if you will, a second blue splodge, who will be our second character. So I'm going to select that and go to make a new, oh, that button's not there. Okay, so it seems that when you create something with the old swatch, you can't select it and then create a duplicate of it. Which is kind of annoying. You kind of need to stay mentally on top of what is a shared swatch and what isn't in order to create new stuff. You know, what if I wanted a second blue thing? It means I need to select something over here, convert that to a tagged swatch, hit OK, open it up, and I was hoping to eyedropper that so I could get the same tint of blue, but I can't. So that's a real shame. That really sucks, because my favorite thing about the Flash swatch system is when you click on this, the eyedropper you get not only updates the color live, but it's not limited to this palette. It is system-wide, not just in the program, but across the operating system. So I can go down here and get this bit of orange, I can get this bit of green, I can get the color from the Apple symbol. So there's that lime green, or sort of. I think that's happening because my tablet's whack. And then save that as a tag swatch. So maybe I can do that, take that blue, and then... Okay, so... Sorry, I'm doing this on the fly and running into errors. I guess this is sort of a good thing, because when it's system-wide, it doesn't just take the color from everywhere, because if I roll over these gradients, notice that it isn't just taking light green, darker green, and then blue, but this symbol up in the corner is actually choosing the full swatch color. So when I roll over this, the program is acknowledging that I'm rolling over a tag swatch and will select the tag swatch. So that's a good thing. It means you're not breaking the system and going to be accidentally painting with a regular swatch when you're intending to use a tagged one. It turns out that the method for creating duplicate swatches is the exact same way that you go about it in Harmony. Choose the swatch you want to duplicate, hit the new swatch button. Okay, bam, there it is. Pick it up, you can move it around between the palettes, so that turned out to be a bleedingly obvious answer that I didn't see, so good thing that it is possible. The Toon Boom version, creating any new palette is the direct result of creating duplicates. Whichever one you have selected, when I go to new, the new one that appears is the same color as the one I selected, and then I can go and choose a brand new color from that point. So you may be asking, why on earth would you want two tag swatches that are identical to one another? Well, for any number of reasons. It has been very important to myself and animators I've worked with to have, say, two different whites that are identified as two different things in case they become something else at other points, and especially when using effects and compositing techniques, as there are methods to summon a particular swatch from the library and make it perform particular tasks. And if it selected everything that was white across the entire project regardless, that would suck and would cause a lot of damage if everyone's eyes started glowing when I only wanted a particular character's eyes to start glowing, for example. I guess full-scale compositing and effects animation like that isn't really a thing in the Animate setup, so maybe that's not so bad, but I still think it's an issue, because what if you wanted to keep the palette separate, have both characters with blue shirts, and then when you updated it to a red shirt later, you only wanted to change one character and not both of them. So that's a bummer. Anyway, moving on. We can set up full palette, so I'm gonna make a bunch of stuff. By just going through the palette here and just pressing the button a few times and building it up. So you can see now, oh hang on, I'll change that from being a blue to a green. No, I need to change it to something completely unique so it doesn't get confusing. There we go, cyan. Okay, so we have two palettes, both with different number of swatches and different ranges in them. So this can be set up as, you know, two different characters, and they can be ported from project to project. So you see, as I click on the palette itself, all of them inside light up, and I believe you can just copy and paste them from one project to another. Let's find out if that works now. Down to the tag swatch section, gonna paste. Damn it, it didn't happen. I really thought that worked, sorry. Can you at least pick up... Oh, you can't select multiple swatches. Can you pick up one and paste it over? Nope, oh well. Sorry about that. I seem to have had a crash, and it wasn't a very good one either. I struggled to get the program back open again. It bounced at the bottom of the screen for a good while, and eventually I force quit it because it didn't seem like it was going to stop. Tried starting it again, and it bounced for a while. The loading screen came up, which was good, but then the crashed unexpectedly box came up as well. Finally, the next attempt worked and that was all fine. So maybe this is just my own personal experience, but it seems like the stability of Flash is yet to be on the mend. However, on the plus side, there is an auto recover feature. You can see just here, it says recover untitled 1. So that is excellent, knowing that you don't have to worry so much about losing your work, even though I literally just have a file of colored splodges in order to demonstrate my explorations. That is good to see. Now, where were we? Ah, yes, I was trying to figure out how to get the tag swatches from one file to another. Turns out that you can't copy and paste the swatches themselves, but you can copy and paste the artwork from one file to another, and that will indeed pass on the swatches themselves. So I'm gonna try that now by just kind of going stroke, stroke, stroke of these 7 colors here. And when that's done, fingers crossed, I can box select all of these, copy them, and then head over to, a new file. I guess the second file did not get recovered. I guess I never did an initial save of that one, so my fault. Select and paste, and there we go. So they have all indeed come across, but unfortunately it looks like they're all lumped into one palette folder. So if you're going to be moving something from one file to another, you're going to have to do it palette by palette, and probably we'll have to rebuild the palette structure each time. So correct me if I'm wrong, but it looks like that is the case. Now, so let's go have a look at the Toon Boom palette structure and how that works. So as we saw before, the list will continue to expand downwards. Moving them from one file to another is as simple as group selecting them like that and copying and pasting over to another file. I don't have one open right now, but just trust me that when you paste it, it will just appear down there. Actually, I could do it by just creating a new palette. I expand that, and you can name the palettes here, and I'll go to plus, new. Down in this section, I'll hit paste, and there they are, just as they were. So these are now duplicate colors, I believe. So let's test it out. If I open up this one and change it to a bright green, will the other one have changed? No, it hasn't. So I can take a copy of palettes over and then adjust it for characters of a slightly different tint if you need to. Okay, so whipped up a silly little thing. We'll probably use this for some armature tests later on, but it utilizes these skin tones and shirt tones and stuff like that. So I want to show how palette varieties work. So along with being able to copy and paste the colors from one file to another, you can also export them as well. So by going up to this secondary pull down menu, there is an import option. I can bring in palettes that I've previously saved. This is especially good when you're working with a team and the whole team can have a shared palette structure that is, kind of locked in place and, all organized, all in the right spot, etc. But it goes one step further as well, which incorporates the use of having lots of scene palette lists up here. Along with separate characters having their own palettes, you can have multiple palettes inside one character, if that makes sense. So inside of this one here, I'm going to right click on it and go to clone. It's a copy that is linked to the original. So remember before I copied these colors over into a new palette, but they were independent. I could change them and that was fine. These ones are linked to the original. So if I change these, if I change that to a green, notice that the character has indeed changed as well. But if I go back to this first one, he goes back to his original state. So the regions and the character are linked to both palettes at the same time because they are essentially one and the same. And what gets chosen is just whichever one I currently have selected. So why would you want a feature like that? Well, if I right click on this and go to tint, there it is, the tint panel, and it brings up this really strange set of sliders. So watch what happens if I select all the colors in the palette, push the amount up to 100%, and then start to pull these sliders along. Do you see what's happening inside these swatches? Look at that. So I'm now applying an influence to each and every swatch at once, and if I hit the preview, we can see it happening live on the character as well. And there's many different ways you can go about adjusting these colors. There's the offset, the blend, and the mixer. They all work in slightly different ways, And the role of what they play can perform many different functions. So if I kind of do this one here, you can click on the actual swatch itself and give it an influence. So you can see it's got a blue one there, and this mixer version is something slightly different again. Basically, it lets you set up like a nighttime version, or a lava planet version, or a super desert version. You know, the character will have slightly different tints of color depending on the environment they are in and the lighting conditions they have. So rather than, you know, having to manually recolor it every time or put it through some filters, etc., etc., there is now a separate palette with all of these very strange neon colors that I've made, and I can flip back and forth whenever I want with a single click. This is a very powerful feature that saves just extraordinary amounts of time, again, especially when working on a large-scale production or with a team. It's something that Adobe Animate simply does not have access to yet. So the tag swatches are a massive step forward. Yes, that is great, but Harmony is still leaps and bounds ahead of Adobe in that respect. Okay, I went ahead and made a couple of other examples because that first one was a bit silly and all over the place. So this first one is kind of like a nighttime example, you know, so it's got a bit of a blue tint to it. And this other one has a bit of a warmer tint to it. And this one, I had influenced every color except for black, because, you know, the black would also turn orange as well. So you can choose which swatches are and are not affected by your color changes, because sometimes you might not want them to be, like black outlines. Okay, that's everything with palettes done and dusted, but that does now transition us into the next thing I want to talk about, which is different ways of selecting colors. Now, this isn't something that's new to the Flash lineup, but seeing as I haven't really done a Flash Toon Boom direct comparison video before, I thought it is worth talking about. Now, each program tackles this in a different way, and it isn't really a one software does it better than the other. They just have unique ways of tackling the same issue. So what on earth am I talking about? Now, the way vector art works, as I'm sure you know, is mathematical shapes that are, you know, you can zoom in infinitely and they don't get pixelated, right? And there's two different types of doing it. There's strokes and there is fills. Fills are typically what you make with the brush, and the vector line appears around the outside of it. If I select it like that, there we go. And the pencil utilizes the stroke, which will put the vector line down the middle of it. Okay, if I select with white, there we go. Okay, so that's how they work. Both Harmony and Animate work the same way in that regard. However, notice that Flash has two different categories, one for selecting stroke color and one for selecting the paint bucket color. Whereas you'll notice that Harmony has three, one for the brush, one for the stroke, and one for fills, more notably the paint bucket tool. Each of these can be selected as independent colors if you wish, and if you want to save yourself some time, there are times where you can link them all together and, you know, you'll never get confused. Whatever color you have selected last will be the color that you use. Now, Animate having these two separate categories for stroke and fills is important. I can select everything, and when I change one of these colors, notice that it is only affecting the one that is containing a fill vector, and if I go through the pencil swatch, it is only affecting what is on the stroke. If you want to use this palette to change all the colors in your scene to the same color, using, say, the tag swatches, for example, selecting everything, notice that only the stroke will go, and then you flip over to the fill and you can change that to the same color if you wish. That is fine. Probably one of the handiest uses of this feature is when it comes to shading. Here is a very similar character to the one I created earlier in Harmony, right? This one has a flat blue toned shirt. I'm going to demonstrate probably the most popular way of creating multi-tone shading in Adobe Animate, which is taking the pencil stroke tool and putting it in like that, right? So these kind of shapes just going all the way down. I've done it before on just like the pants and that. Other few shapes, there we go. And plopping in the darker tone as one does. There we go. Okay, say you've done this for, a very detailed thing. These green lines are existing all over the place, and it would take a long time to go through and select every individual one to delete it. Animate has a very nice, not exactly intentional feature, but a trick that works well, where you can select the whole thing, and then via the stroke tool color selector, just go up to no color, and it will just remove every stroke that is on the drawing, leaving you with a nice clean thing. So that is a great way of going about it, being able to select every single stroke and every single fill on the stage at any particular time. Now, Harmony doesn't work quite like this. Rather than selecting all the fills or all the strokes, it instead has a select by color option, which is this red arrow here in tool properties when you have the black selection tool on. So notice now when I grab the black outlines, for example, it will pull everything that is that particular black. So, that swatch, not any black, but everything that is assigned to that swatch. Should I demonstrate? Is that worth demonstrating? I guess so. Here is red. I'll make a copy of that. Here is more red. Two different swatches that are the same color. So if I grab it with the select by color, notice that it is pulling the shade of the pants because they share a swatch, whereas this one is its own element. As far as I know, there is no way to select absolutely everything of that particular tone, and there is no way of just grabbing exclusively fills and or strokes. But in my experience of using this program for many years, that's never really been an issue. If you're working smart, things are categorized by the colors that you intend for them to be, and by shading using the same technique that I was showing you in Adobe Animate earlier, so by putting lots of green strokes in and then using them to paint bucket it all, rather than selecting everything with the select by color, grab those strokes and delete, you are all good. Another option of doing shades, however, is of course the invisible stroke lines. That's a different topic though, but you can draw with a vector level thickness of 0, so then you don't need to bother about deleting them so far. But personally, I prefer to use a nice bright pencil to get that job done. So while we're on the topic of the pencil tool, this is quite a notorious and infamous feature of the old Flash days, and that is no one really used it. I don't really know anyone that really prides themselves on using the pencil tool. It is a feature that is supposed to be nice. It has a lot more flexibility than the brush, but unfortunately it doesn't really work, and it never really has worked that well. Its smoothness is not great. It often changes shape to not exactly what you drew, and it doesn't look like that's really been fixed. The other big issue is no pressure sensitivity at all. It is always a consistent shape no matter what, giving very rigid and inorganic lines. But a feature has been added to the pencil tool to help combat this negative reputation with mild success. Here, I'll show you what I mean. Here are a few strokes, and now there is a new tool down here. What this does is you can pull on the strokes themselves and see what it's doing. It adds a variable line thickness to the stroke itself, so I can make it thin, thick in certain places, and then pull parts out to different edges. This could be quite useful, I think. And now back over in the pencil tool, under width, it is possible to save some of these strokes underneath the pencil itself. So hang on, here's something real thick, and you see it automatically will give it a thin, thick effect like that. But notice how it tends to interact with other vectors as they auto-flatten themselves. So now that this exists, I will be very surprised if a full pressure-sensitive pencil doesn't appear in future versions. Keep an eye out. If it doesn't, that is a huge missed opportunity and very disappointing. But how useful is being able to control the thickness of a stroke in post? Only mildly, I think. There's not really much more you can do with it after this. It is possible to animate the thickness. However, it is only through a shape tween, and if you have any previous experience with Flash, you're probably aware that shape tweens are also quite infamous and hold a pretty bad reputation for 90% of the time straight up not working and breaking your animation in all kinds of horrible, horrible ways. So check this out, this is the Harmony version. First of all, the pencil does have a full pressure sensitivity, just like the brush does, and it feels very, very nice to draw with. Most, if not all the time, you don't need to go in to edit the thickness of this stuff because, you know, you just draw it that way. But if you do, there is a pencil editor, and it works pretty much exactly the same as the Adobe Animate one I just showed you, but you can also access these Bezier curves as well. It feels pretty much just like editing the bounding box of any other vector shape, really. But how you can animate these over time is quite incredible. And how you do it is we can actually control the thickness of a line on the next level up simply through the rendering engine. The drawings are completely done, we're not touching it, but through the rendering engine we can override the thickness of a line. Let's see how that goes. Go over to layer properties, and inside of that there is it transformation? Advanced. Yes, it's in the advanced tab. There's this section called line thickness, and when you hop over to render view, and it shows everything how it's going to be when it comes out. If you flip on the adjust pencil line thickness, it will activate these controls and will actually override what you drew. Okay, it takes relativity into account, so where it was thin it will keep it thin, and where it was thick it will keep it thick relative to the other strokes. But now through this control panel here, I can punch in different numbers, and you see what's happening there? Everything relative to one another is being manually controlled, and this is universal. So however I manipulate these lines now, if I were to tween them smaller, notice that they have indeed stayed the same level of thickness relative to the camera. So if I make them really big, they automatically thin themselves out to stay the same size. So that's very, very cool. It doesn't just work with tweening. If I was to physically pick up the camera and zoom in through 3D space to get closer to the lines, it will also auto adjust itself. And you get a lot of fine tuning with this feature. It's very, very handy. But something that I'm really excited to show off is to do with the good old brush tool, and that is this zoom size with stage. This has been something that has plagued Flash since the very beginning, and I've always wondered if it's a feature or if it was an oversight. And that is, with this thing turned off, this is the way that it's always worked, right? I'm assuming most of the audience has used Flash at some point and is fully aware of this, but the cursor stays the same to the screen, meaning as you zoom in, it doesn't realize that it's actually changing size extremely dramatically. This is super, super dumb. This is not the way programs should work. People should not be expected to stay at one particular zoom level for their entire workflow process. What if you need to get to a finer detail? You simply are not allowed to unless you zoom in and then hope that you can scale the brush up to the same size. It was always plagued by a limited number of brush sizes as well, so sometimes you're just rotten out of luck. You have to work at the same zoom level. This had been the case for so long that animators had developed some kind of love-hate relationship with it. They were so used to working this way that now they can't live without it. So rather than just switching it over, Adobe was wise enough to realize that it needs to be a switch. If it was turned over to the correct method entirely, there would likely be riots. Personally, I am very glad this now works sensibly. And no matter how far in and out I go, when we go back to the same level, these lines are all indeed the same thickness. I was very excited to hear that this had been added, and now that the brush works the way the brush in any other program ever works. But my excitement was short-lived, because in the classic version, CS4, right, the controls for the brush appear down here. You select it and it appears down here, and there are a set number of brush sizes. There's 8 of them in total. Whereas the pencil, when you select that, it gave you an option in the properties panel. You get this slider and you can move it anywhere from 0.1 all the way up to 200. So it gets stupid thick and stupid thin, which is really, really nice. But again, because the pencil was broken, no one used it, and we were stuck with the set sizes that the brush enabled. And you would get thicker brushes simply by zooming out and drawing from further away. So when they added this zoom with stage thing, I only assumed that it would scale in the same way that a stroke does, but it doesn't. It has the same brush sizes in this list, but I guess in order to appear more correct, it also has a slider. But unfortunately, the slider, see how it snaps? It snaps between those same presets. That is now simply the one at the bottom. Scroll down to there, it is now, see how it's got it selected? So these are literally just preset markers. It has a maximum size and a minimum size, which is really not that flexible at all, and very disappointing that it's not been fixed up. Again, I must show you the Harmony equivalent of this. The Harmony equivalent has the adjustable slider for both the pencil and the brush, but it doesn't just work in whole numbers. You can go down to like stupidly like refined, and goes all the way up to 500. So that's about that much of the stage. How much is that on the, how big does the flash one go? So equivalent to that. Also, no, I'm wrong, because the default stage size is still, you know, very small. What is it? Yeah, so 550 by 400. This is, this version is 1080p, so the point I'm trying to make is you get as much variation as you need. While we're talking about the brush, there's something that is worth pointing out. I personally haven't had too much problem with it yet. I've seen it a couple of times, but not so much at the moment. It's sort of happening here. Do you see this? These little notches. The way vectors work in the brush tool and throughout the program seem to have been rewritten somewhat, creating these strange shapes that can appear. Now, some don't mind this, some may even like this, but there are those who hate it, and the fact that it is now wrecking their lines has been the final straw, causing some to call it quits on Adobe entirely. You see now some of my spirals I was doing there, you see it's kind of kept the angularness of it from the demo line. That's no good at all. So this is definitely a massive problem, and the subtle things are often more important than the big or the gimmicky ones. I've mentioned on this channel before, probably my favorite feature in Toon Boom Harmony is the shift key, allowing you to temporarily move between a brush and a line tool. I love this so much, and many animators begin to depend on such a feature. It's so good, but it's so simple and so subtle even. It's kind of like when smartphones first started coming out and they had that momentum scrolling thing. It's a fairly small thing, but we all use it on a fundamental level, and it's just kind of there and a part of us now. It's such a small and a subtle thing, and it's rarely a selling point, but it's what we depend on the most. Whereas on the other end, you'd have the gimmicky stuff, right? Things like the 3D on the 3DS, it gets your attention, but how many people actually use it every day? So how the most important tool in the program behaves and performs is probably the single most important thing. And if it's true that it is now worse than it was, and to some people even unusable, then that is a very, very big problem. So yes, I was disappointed to see that. It's you know, kind of a 2 steps forward, 1 step back kind of thing, and I think is a really good example of how I'd sum up the whole Adobe Animate experience, which is, it's good, but. Many of these features have been good, but 1 or 2 things that have been a setback, and on a couple of occasions have made the new edition not even worthwhile. Now, while on the topic of the brush and just the way vectors work and all that, something we definitely need to talk about is the way Adobe Animate auto flattens things. This is something that can be incredibly useful or an incredible setback, depending on if you simply know that the program works this way. When you're aware of it and when you're used to it, it is very handy. What it is for those who are unaware is, you see me just draw all these shapes, everything is on the same layer and they are fully flattened. You know, they're not individual strokes stacked up on one another. You saw I draw all these blue shapes independently, but they are all indeed connected. And it has cut away where the color changes. So underneath this red, the blue line does not exist. It has eaten away. I've deselected these blue strokes. If I select them again, it has eaten away from the red. if I pick up this red and place it over there, they have now become one shape. So this can be a very useful thing. If you're not aware of it, it can be a very damaging thing. Harmony, I believe, mixes the best of both worlds. By default, the strokes are kept individual from one another. As I pick up each one, you can see they remain independent of one another, and I can move them all around. This allows me to change the strokes individually if I need to, and I can also reorder them, moving them up and down accordingly. I'm going to place a few more colored bits and splodges in as I did before. I can select the whole lot and see how these individual shapes intersect. We can see that the blue lines do indeed continue underneath the green shape, but there is a button down on the Tool Properties menu, and when I press that, it will flatten all of the shapes into one piece, just as they work in Adobe Animate. See how it's now chopped up that red line, and all of these blue ones have been connected into one piece. So depending on your preferred method of working, you can choose either way. The brush tool has the same auto flatten button, which allows me to paint, and all of the shapes will automatically be flattening themselves as I go, just as the Adobe Animate method works. Personally, I prefer to work with the auto flatten mode off because it kind of just eliminates any risk, and then when you're confident that things are where they need to be, or you need to perform that kind of auto pathfindery vectory ET goodness, it is a button. It is a function that you can take advantage of when you need it. Now I should talk about object drawing mode. Down here there is this little button here under the brush, and when you put strokes down, it does the equivalent of what Toon Boom's doing where it isn't auto flattening. I can pick up these individual strokes, and you notice that they stay separated from one another, and I can bend their edges and it's not being influenced. I can even change its color, and the others are not influenced. This is good, this can be useful. However, its limitation is halted immediately after drawing it because you cannot paint bucket between the shapes that are created. So this is why auto flatten is on by default, and why most Flash animators will work this way probably 99% of the time, and there's the odd occasion where object drawing mode may come on, but is also why in the Harmony environment, why I recommend that the auto flatten is off, or rather object drawing mode is on, because I can pick up these pieces, move them around, change their color independently, but paint bucketing does still work. So if you're a Flash user and you're very used to the idea of auto flattening, give this a spin for a few days and see how you feel. So that is how vectors tend to behave across the two animation softwares. So I've been going back and forth a little bit talking about both the new additions to Adobe Animate and just kind of the general relation between the two programs on features that they've both had for donkey's years. The last big addition to Adobe Animate is a vector texture brushy thing, and it is awesome. This is something that I think Adobe's done very, very well at. Let's dive in and see how it works. In the toolbar, you'll notice a third brush type has been added called the paintbrush tool. When you draw with it, it creates all these dots, but when you let go, the stroke is created. Why on earth would you want something like this? It's because you can add more shapes to it other than a simple line. How many shapes? Infinity shapes! When you go to Window, Brush Library, it opens up this incredibly diverse archive of different textured shapes that you can choose between. Some things are simple shapes, others are stuff that you might find in the real world, cloud type shapes or arrows, etc. So let's demonstrate how this thing works. You can see there is an arrow one here. And what's so cool about this is as I draw it, it will always take the shape and the length of the stroke that I create. So with one stroke we see it's a very standard line, but what if I go, it has created an arrow fully to what I have just drawn. And this works with all of the different shapes that exist in the library and any others that you upload to that library. So there's all sorts of different uses for this. Imagine being able to create grass, and then you can create, you know, grass strokes like this. Pretend it's grass, okay? It's grass. And then you can animate that all kind of wafting in the breeze. So what if we were to animate these kind of wafting in the breeze? There's probably a couple of ways we could do it. The first would be by shape tweening it, right? So I'm going to take one of these into their own layer and shape tween it. Oh dear, this is something that I wasn't sure when I was going to bring up, but it kills the program. I haven't put that many strokes in yet. There's maybe about a dozen or so, and look how chuggy the program has become. All I'm trying to do is pan around. Fortunately, it doesn't tend to slow down actually drawing stuff. Let's see how it goes at picking things up. So moving stuff around still seems to be sort of okay. Oh, it depends, doesn't it? No, that's not good at all. Yeah, I don't know what to say because I feel like I'm ragging on this program too much, but it keeps happening. There's good things being added, and I'm looking for these good things to talk about, but they all have this huge but on the end. They're good, but it wrecks the program and you can't work at a decent pace anymore, which is really frustrating. So I'm going to turn that layer off and go to a blank one. Let's see if we can animate this thing. Okay, so I'm on a fresh layer. I'm going to just draw a single one. This is kind of like a grass type texture. I think it's called tulip. And we're going to try and do a shape tween on it to see if we can get it to create a convincing wafting in the breeze type animation. So I've created a new keyframe, and on it I'm going to bend it down a bit like that and create shape tween. And you see that works really, really well. So, you know, with a bit of finessing, creating the eases and doing all that, you could create some really nice convincing animations using these strokes, and it would save you a lot of time. Just be very careful on how you manage your file because you've seen how quickly it tends to slow it down. The other but is when it comes to manipulating these strokes, what I think is really, really cool is notice how that this is happening live. I can move it all around and it looks great. If I create things with the line tool, notice that it also happens live. I think it's a bit of a bummer that using the actual stroke tool itself, it doesn't do it live. You have to let go to see how it turns out. Anyway, the but I was talking about is as you start manipulating these things, it doesn't take very long until it starts to misbehave and can become very difficult to get into the right spot. I'm getting lucky right now. It is actually correcting itself okay, but when I was messing around with those arrows before, it started getting very, very strange very quickly. I think I'm going to see what it takes to actually break it by just doing a slightly more complicated shape and see. There we go. So already there, it's got too many vector points for it to really know what's going on. It's a very simple shape, so you can't see it very much. If I choose one of the more complicated brushes, so look at the shape of this brush. This is pretty nuts. So if I do something like that, and it's all over the place, and now I want to change its shape, you can see it doesn't take long for it to be very difficult to control. It's not moving large chunks of it. It's moving very specifically what I'm grabbing, and it pulls the shape along with it. So I've gone overboard there. Let's try something a little bit simpler like that. So that's not too complicated. And even then it's not working. It's staying pinned on this point and is pulling the texture along with it. And what if I want to keep it in a certain point? It's not going to do it. So that's a real shame. I pull the tip and the whole thing. Oh geez, what's happened then? I'm going to delete that before this gets chaotic. And just leave you with the point I wanted to make, which is it's good, but you need to be extremely careful and simple. You can't really push this feature very far before it kind of just, well, poos itself and dies. Next I want to talk about armatures, bone rigging and all that. It's something that both programs can do. It was removed from Flash for a while, but it is now back in Animate CC. I'm not sure how different it is to the old days, but we will explore a bit and see what it can do, and of course compare it to Harmony's capabilities of having a rigged character. So let's see, have they got it right, or is it yet another good thing but? So let's test it out. I'm going to put in just a little black splodge thing with some gross spindly fingers like the magnificent artist that I am. Grab our bone tool and start pulling down to an elbow, and then pull off that elbow down to the wrist like that. And with the selection tool, if I'm right, it should pick up and start Whoa, look at that. Isn't that cool? So what we get is a built-in IK feature, which is, you know, like a puppet on a strings thing. So I'm moving the hand and automatically bends the elbow and the shoulder. And it morphs the shape of our vectors to follow suit as well, which is a pretty cool thing because, well, you know, you can see what's happening. However, of course, the small but is sometimes it bends it in a way that might be a little bit strange, or can bend it in a way that downright is incorrect. Are there ways around this? I believe so. I've not been able to dig too deeply into this one, so hopefully someone will correct me if there's any mistakes, but it looks as if there's ways of highlighting the individual vector points and being able to assign them to one of the two bones. I've been clicking around and I'm struggling to find you know, a button that actually will do that, so I'm afraid I can't demonstrate it for you now, but it looks to be that that is the case. I think I might have accidentally done it a little bit. As you can see, the tricep is staying put as the arm is moving up, so that it looks like there may be ways to finesse this to get it pretty close to working properly, but I'm not sure how you'd be able to avoid the crossing over silliness. What I have here now is a makeshift arm built out of 3 preset symbols, you can see here. So what I'm going to try now is building another armature that this time, rather than building on top of the raw vectors, is going on top of the individual symbols. I believe it works as so. And now, there we go. So you see how this picks up, and this works quite well. So it doesn't break the vectors, of course. However, because they are separate symbols, you need to be very careful about how they're stacked up on top of one another. Lines overlapping, things looking very puzzle piecey. I've chosen these 3 gray shapes here because they all overlap very seamlessly. They're all one color. There's nothing to really go strange. So this would probably work particularly well if you're doing an animation with like silhouettes and that. But anything dramatically complicated, I'm not sure. Give it some tests. If you get anything that works wonderful, send it my way. I'll probably give it a feature and point out to people, hey, this actually works. Here is our wonderfully beautiful man from earlier. I'm going to try and build a slightly more complicated rig through this guy using only the vector shapes and try to avoid using symbols if possible. I'm going to see what happens if I can try and get the arms moving independently and all that. It doesn't look like that's going to happen. So it seems being able to make fully riggable characters, you're going to have to go the symbol inside symbol method, but you are able to kind of daisy chain them up using the bones and maybe have some of the simpler elements in it go the deformation route. So you could bend, you know, just have this whole arm here in one symbol with the vector bend in it, but it would need to be on a separate symbol to the body, for example, which can have a spine in it. So this feature looks okay, but like some of the other things I've shown, just be a bit careful with it and you may be able to produce some good results. Now, of course, we need to go have a look at the Harmony equivalent of making deformation armature chains. Is it better than the Adobe Animate equivalent? Yeah, of course it is. That's been the case with everything I've shown, but how much better is it? Okay, so like the Flash version, I'm going to try and build up an armature on this character without making any symbols. It's just the flat thing. Let's see how we do. I'm going to pop down just some bones as we did before. You see there is an option to generate these kind of regions of influence. These are an optional thing. Sometimes you need them, sometimes you don't. On this particular character, we do, so that it won't end up taking half of his body and legs along with it. Now, back into the animation mode, I can pick up the arms, move the hands around. You see it works quite well, but like everything else, we need a bit of testing. And you see there, that's where it starts to break and go all skew-if. So it works, but you will need to kind of deeply finesse it so you can get it working better and better. So one of those things is being able to change those borders, which you saw before. I can also pick up the joints and change their size. The wrist, oh, should that be a bit smaller or bigger? I'm not too sure. I'm fairly new to the bone rigging system myself. I haven't used it too much in this program nor in Flash, so if this is something you aren't familiar with, drop me a line and tell me how much of an idiot I'm being right now by doing something stupidly obvious and am missing it and am making an embarrassment out of us all. Blah. The tremendous advantage to the Harmony rigging system is there are many ways of doing it, and you can kind of mix and match these different techniques depending on your project and what will make it work the best. So the one that exists in both Adobe Animate and Harmony 12 is this bone joint method, right? But there are a few others. One is being able to make a Bezier curve method. So you can see here, this will ignore the breaking hand, but you can see the arm is kind of bending in an S shape, and it just follows this curvature line here. So you can get a lot more control and bend and kind of noodliness with that, opposed to the rather rigid elbow joint. And take special note of how these curve armatures work. I think this would be the best way to try and replicate what Animate is doing with its new texture brush. You can see it can take any shape and morph it quite full on. Imagine this arm is an arrow. There you go. So that is two options of being able to create skeletal rigs inside of a character, but even they are starting to go the way of the dinosaur, introducing the envelope deformer. This is potentially the most powerful form of rigging inside the Harmony setup. Rather than making bones through the character, it makes the kind of curvy based ones around them, and it allows you to morph and manipulate drawings in such incredible ways that it starts to look like it isn't even rigged at all. See how this character is moving? Oh man, look at this. Look at this. He looks frame by frame. This file comes courtesy of Toon Boom themselves. They put together this file to demonstrate just how it works, and you can see it's very, very impressive. Believe it or not, this character is a cutout rig, and the whole thing is animated with a single drawing. As the head turns around, as it blinks, as he leaps, check out how the hands and the feet move. It's just crazy. It is, of course, however, not simple. It's a very complicated technique. For those who are currently following along with my cutout animation series, this is the eventual triumphant climax to that series, but I personally am not confident enough with these techniques to feel worthy of demonstrating it. I'll get there eventually. Tune in then and we'll make some pretty incredible stuff. To preview though, I'm going to show you how complicated its rig is. Oh, yes, there are many layers contained within this rig. If you've seen any of the new Disney series The Lion Guard, it uses a technique very similar to this, and you can see the extent of what cutout rigs are capable of in Harmony. Now, while I'm here, I'll briefly mention this. This is the node network. I've mentioned it a couple of times before, but I'm yet to go into any great detail with it. In a moment, I will go through some miscellaneous bits and bobs that either program is missing and the pros and cons they have over one another. This is something I won't go into too much depth for, because if I went into everything that Toon Boom has, which Flash doesn't, we'll probably be here all day. But this is one of the biggies. It's a node network system that is used for layer construction, effects, building armatures, etc. It's incredibly deep. It begins to rival After Effects in what kind of compositing you can do with it, but think extremely deep effects, extremely good compositing. If After Effects has been a part of your pipeline, you may be able to ditch it after you learn this. It's really, really good. This is what I do as a day job, and I think it's magnificent, and is the calling card for Harmony Premium, you know, the top end, most expensive and expansive version. Personally, I think the premium price tag is worth it for this feature alone, but I won't go any more deep into it now, just to let you know that it's there, and it is very, very good, and I don't think I ever really have any problems with it. Like a couple of other things with Harmony, it can just take a little while to wrap your head around and learn, but when you do, oh boy. Oh boy. Okay, now the whole nested symbol and keyframing, tweening thing should be mentioned as well. This is something that is probably best to watch inside the Migrating of Flash series, the seminar that I did for Toon Boom on migrating from Flash, etc., because tweening and symbols is something that is fundamental to the Flash setup, and if you're someone who's considering moving over to Toon Boom, you're going to be wondering how to do it. So I might as well cover it here again in case you haven't seen it, and if you have, it's always good to have a bit of a refresher anyway, so who cares? Alright, so tweening in Flash for those who are Harmony users, but I don't know, just sit in anyway, okay? Even if you know how to make a tween, it's just, alright? You make a keyframe, you make another keyframe, you move it to another place. It's all very good. Move it over, insert a classic tween, and it will turn purple. It'll do that, lovely. But there is a slightly more correct way, but it's never been the way that anyone really does it because it's more complicated and tends to kind of just slow you down and not even look that good anyway. I'm not sure if this is new to Animate CC or if it's something that has been around for a little while and I simply missed its arrival, is the way the blue modern motion tweens work. I've seen them in CS4 and they sucked really bad because you couldn't swap drawings out mid-tween. You couldn't even swap symbols out on that layer. It was just like, this layer is now dedicated to that symbol and this one set of motion, that is it, deal with it. And it just felt untested, and that it was developed, it was shown to a producer and they're like, yeah, cool, you got tweening working, put it in. And then it was put in and never thought about it again. But like a few other things in the new Animate, it seems to be at least somewhat thought through now. So there is a layer that is set up as a tween layer, and I can move it down, and then you see it inserts a keyframe there. I'll move over to a little bit later and move it up, and you see the tween chain is created. And my favorite thing about the tween chain is that it acts like a regular vector line, right? So I can pick up the points, I can curve them, I can curve them around, I can influence the chain and give it a motion path very, very easily. And you see the points of keyframes automatically appear as I move it around. If I double tap on the tween itself, it'll open up and I can get to some of the movement parameters that are inside. So these curves here show how it is moving on the X and Y dimensions. And down on the list, it shows each of those dimensions highlighted. And I believe as I go about influencing this tween in different ways, it'll then add those parameters to the tween at varying points. So there you go. You see a scale XY has now been added, and it is independent of the other tweens. Now, this is something that in the early days of the new motion tween setup, I personally loathed. I thought it was very, very frustrating to have things like scale and rotation be tweened independently of the position, because you'd have all these dots, right? And you would want it to get smaller, then get bigger, and then you'd go and add the scale in wanting it to influence just these two, right? And suddenly the keyframe is added to the whole thing, and you didn't know why, because accessing these graphs was very frustrating to do, and managing it would just cost a whole lot of time. Most animators agreed that it was just easier to go the old-fashioned route of every time you added in a new keyframe like that, that is a universal lock. It corresponds to new size, new position, new everything, and then when you created a tween between point A and B, it would always animate everything. If you wanted the scale to be tweened independent of the position, that's what nested symbols were for. You would pack it into a symbol, you'd go inside, it would have its own independent timeline. The inside one, you would make one long tween of scale, and on top you would make all the small tweens of position. That's a mouthful. Hopefully that made sense, but this is the new method. Is it actually usable now? Well, for one, I can actually see everything in the graph at once, and it's very easy to read. I can see what's going on, but is it easy to make the parameters all for one for all, like the classic tweening method? If I click on an area that hasn't been influenced yet, and I go to Insert Keyframe, it has now got a drop-down menu, and I can choose for any of the individual parameters or all of them. And you see now each of those parameters has had a new bit added, right? So if I go in again and add another all keyframe, I can change its position and its location and do all that good stuff. So I believe this has mixed the best of both worlds. We've got the classic tweening method with the advantages of the new tweening method. Well, it's not so new anymore because it's existed for nearly 10 years. But now you can influence the curves and the graphs and all that kind of stuff, but not have it be utter bullcrap. Hooray! I think this is awesome. And if you're a Flash animator and you intend to remain being a Flash animator, I would highly encourage the prospect that now is the time to leave classic tweens behind once and for all and move over to the new motion tween method. Because I can still go to split motion and it will now generate a brand new block, keyframe thing. It's a brand new thing. I can remove the tween on it and get back to the classical way of doing things, and we're not stuck with a committed tweened layer. Okay, so all the graphy stuff is really, really nice. How does Harmony tackle it? It's in quite a similar way, but let's have a look. Rather than several different motion tween methods to choose from, it has just one, and you can place it down in, I suppose, a few different ways. So just like before, I'm going to plant a keyframe at the beginning, and a bit later on in this animation, move him over there, and we can crack open its parameters as well by hitting this little plus symbol, and it opens on up. We can see each of the parameters and a numerical representation of where it sits. So it doesn't show the graph right away, it just shows it by number, but we can get to each one and move its keyframes back and forth and do all the timing stuff we need to. This is also a place where we can apply easing to different parameters one by one, which is quite good. And even up here, we can cycle through the drawings that exist inside this layer. So this is good for things like lip syncing, swapping out hand states during movement, all that kind of lovely stuff is controlled there. Now, rather than just grabbing and moving stuff, you can animate effects here and, glows, transparencies, all blurs, all of that kind of thing. It works in a very similar way to After Effects does. So you can see these plus symbols. So for example, I'll slam a plus down there on scale and move it on up. There we go, it scales out towards the X-ness thing. So how this compares to the Flash version, I was just showing you how, the scale tween is separate to the positional one and all that kind of stuff. This tackles those scenarios in a very, very clever way. And that is, with these parameters open up, I can go to each one and just slam the make keyframe thing, and you see it puts them in on the parameters as I choose them. But if I add the keyframe to the topmost portion, the one that is named after the layer itself, you can see it plants it down on everything down inside. This is also the case if the parameters panel is collapsed and you're just on the drawing itself. If I were to put a keyframe here and then open it up, we will see that it has naturally put them all the way down. So this eliminates any difficult thinking, because I think 95% of the time when you're keyframing and tweening something, you want it to apply to every other parameter, right? If you want the scale to be separate to the movement, that's a rarity. That's when you're going to know that to open it up and to apply it separately. And if you don't, it's indestructible. I can grab these scale keyframes here and delete just those and go and animate them again independently of the rest of it. And the program understands that, and it's all very efficient. If you want to kind of do that nested method where, you'd have a symbol that animates the scale and then a symbol on top of that that animates the position, you can do the same thing with pegs. So pegs are a really cool thing because they are simply empty drawings, if that makes sense. They correspond simply to animating movement and grouping different drawing layers together. I'll demonstrate them a little bit more later, but yeah, so I can put scale on this peg and then put it inside another one that controls movement, and that does come in handy many times where you'd have lots of characters that are all doing different, say they're all doing a walk cycle, then you lump them all inside one peg and then keyframe them moving from left to right across the screen. But what of the graphs? Can you get to them? Yes, you can. There's a separate panel for it called the function panel. I gotta admit, I personally very, very rarely use this. It doesn't seem very necessary when we work with an illustrative medium. The graph animating system is something that I believe is a lot more useful for 3D animators because, they're working with characters moving all over the place and you want to be able to see it in one spot. But for what we do, picking up and just moving and scaling the thing yourself and just doing it by eye, From what I've seen and what I've experienced with other people is just always well, at least almost always, the fastest and the better looking way. But you know, here you can get to each of the parameters, see their charts, and animate them from here as well if you so desire. Move them around, change their easing, all that kind of stuff. So it works well. You know, I don't dislike it, I just don't think it's very necessary. The last thing is the motion paths. You know how in Animate we just looked how it creates that kind of path thing and you can bend it all around. This is here, but I gotta admit, I think I like the Flash one a little bit better. First you have to summon it. You press this orange button here and this orange line appears. You see it looks just like the Flash one and you can, you know, move it around and you can see the path of motion. However, unlike the Flash equivalent, it doesn't work like a shape. I can't necessarily pick it up directly. You see as I'm moving now, it moves the character and generates more keyframes. So it's not necessarily worse, it is just different. I do like being able to pick it up and move it around as a shape in Flash, and it is a shame that it doesn't work quite like that here, but there are ways of doing it. You can create control points and bend the shape and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, you know, it's there and it is what it is. More or less the same kind of thing. Before we close off talking about motion path animating, I believe it would be a good idea to touch on easing. In the classic tween method, I set up this, you know, it's just a circle. It moves from left to right, and then another one where it gets a bit smaller moves down to the center, right? So this section, very, very simple, moving at a steady pace. The easing for this old method was also a very straightforward one. By hitting in the middle of the tween, the ease would just be a slider that you'd move from one extreme to the other. So if I pump that down and this one to -100, we will see it slow to a gradual stop and speed back up again. And it always goes from point to point on that scale. What does this button do? Oh, there you go. It looks like it does have a graph. Is this new? I don't think I've ever seen this before, but this allows you to give a lot more fine-tuned control from point to point because you can speed it up and slow it down multiple times within the movement. Let's see. I'm really just going to push this far and we'll see what happens. All right, this should be fun. There you go. So you put it upside down and it can even scale backwards along the same movement. Now, in the Flash CS4 days, this is where the new motion tween method really started to break down because you could only apply an ease to the entire thing. So for it to be of any use, we need to be able to make eases between small point to small point. There's an add ease button here, which I haven't used yet, and a bunch of presets. So here is the stop start one. We can see it will slow down in the middle and speed back up. Let's make it more extreme like that. Oh, can I pump it all the way up? There we go. I guess that's the ease happening there, maybe? See what happens. Okay, we can see from the motion path in the middle that there are a lot more frames, a lot more dots collected in the center of the animation. So it is working, but from what I can see, it is applied across the entire thing. And from what I can see, there is no way to add eases on the incremental sub keyframes. So I might have to take back what I just said about switching to this method because easing is really important when it comes to motion tweens. What a shame. I'm really disappointed about that actually because this graph system is really nice. Does it exist elsewhere? Is there another way to get to it? I'd like to know. Back in Harmony now, I've created almost exactly the same animation of just a circle moving across and going down. Very, very simple, moving static. How do you make eases here? There's a few different ways to pull it off. My personal favorite method of creating eases is with this button here. This allows you to select a whole lot of parameters at the same time, all the way through tons of different layers, shapes, character parts, etc. There's only one here now, but that's okay, it works just as well. So I'll select on the line, hit that button, and it brings up this kind of chart here. It only lets you work with one keyframe at a time, but I think that works quite well. You can pull it out on a handle, or you can punch it in manually. I often like to punch it in. Let's go 40, 0, hit apply, and you see how it creates the ease there. Hop over to the next frame. I can put in some eases all across the animation, and you see it doesn't take long to kind of fire your way through all the keyframes and add whatever ease you wish, and you can scan through it like so. But with Harmony 12, there is an even faster method, which is quite similar to the presets we just saw in Adobe Animate, where you can select all the keyframes you want to apply the ease to, and there is a drop-down menu just here in the top left of the timeline view, and you can see just with these little preview graphs what they do. So this one right here is approximately the same as what we just created. However, unlike the Adobe Animate version, this applies the ease to each individual keyframeable movement, not the entire layer in one hit. This is a great way of working and definitely my favorite way of doing it. Is it possible to do what Adobe Animate was doing, where you can create, one ease to apply to an entire layer in one hit? I believe you can make all sorts of different complicated eases in Harmony. It's not something I've really dove in too deeply into, because this is what has always gotten me by the entire time I've been using it. There's several different ways of creating tweens in general, but it is quite a deep rabbit hole, too much of one to go into now, because it's frankly not all that relevant, but it may have applicability to some people's workflows here and there, but isn't broad enough to really warrant going into today. But it's likely a feature that I'll go a lot more in depth on in its own video in the future. If you want to have swappable parts, you can go inside the symbol and do the frame by frame thing as you would. But this, I believe, is one of the remaining and will likely be ongoing fundamental problems that Flash has. I don't think it will go away because, Flash animators rely and they are very used to the idea of stacking symbols inside symbols inside symbols. And if it were to go away or change too much, then there would be riots in the streets. But I believe the nested symbol way to be a problem. It's something that most are used to, yes, but that doesn't necessarily make it good. And I guess it is still my opinion, but it's a very educated opinion, and I really believe this to be the case. It's from an organizational standpoint, it's from a being able to wrap your head around the entire animation process standpoint, it's from an ease of use standpoint, and it's from a, just being able to create a better animation standpoint. So what the heck do I actually mean by this? I'm going to do an example in both programs, and we'll see exactly what I'm talking about. The differences in the layer symbol hierarchy structure thing that is the main aspect that sets the two programs apart from one another and will likely remain to be the main thing that sets the two programs apart from one another. My example will be a blank arm with a stick hand gross thing that has 4 fingers because there was enough room for it. Okay, so the way Flash has always worked. Keep watching if you're even a Flash user, I don't care. Go modify, convert to symbol, and you would turn it into a symbol, right? This will turn it into a block of vector stuff that you now cannot draw over. And you move it to another position, say it is waving. I'm gonna move it up here. Again, I'm using the classic Tween method this time, because it's a very simple movement, that's all we need. Up it goes. Oh dear. What the heck's happened? Oh yeah, okay. I'm glad I made this mistake because it's worth pointing out. Why is this still a problem? You have to remember to never ever move your pivot point after making a tween, because it will break the whole thing. It moves and then snaps to its new position. If you're a new Flash user, you will pull your hair out for ages trying to figure out why this is the case, and then you have to dedicate it to muscle memory that you are never allowed to move pivot points. It's almost like the user is being shamed. So undoing all of that. Have to undo all of it. Before making the new keyframe, put the pivot point in place. I forgot that was a thing, it was so long ago. Okay, create the new pivot point, rotate it up to its new position, create the classic tween, and it should work. There we go. Okay, no bullcrap sliding. Now, say I wanted to have the fist clencher turn into a pointing hand or whatever. There's no way to swap out the drawings or have a frame by frame animation play while the tween goes. The way you have to do it is double click to go inside the hand itself, and then usually you have to memorize how long it is if you want it to be exactly the same length. So that's 24 frames, I think. Yeah. 24 frames, double click inside, I'll go to 24 frames, insert frame, so there's enough wiggle room there, it is sitting there just like that. And if I want to have a closed fist, that's when you go and start doing your frame by frame animating. Okay, simple closing hand, not much to it, just over 3 frames. It goes from an open palm to a clenched fist. But the problem Flash animators have always had to deal with is kind of just keeping everything in their head. They're not able to test as they're doing, so like they're doing the frame by frame part where it's a still hand, right? But in order to test if it is working, they need to go outside of the symbol and then see it happening on the fly. But the other thing I remembered, you can't make it a movie clip. You have to make sure you save it as a graphic symbol, and then it will play the animation as it goes. So there we can see it is moving and clenching the fist as it goes. And this process has always worked, but it is not exactly convenient. As you have a more and more complicated setup with symbols inside symbols inside symbols, your workflow may be one where you're constantly drilling up and down through an insane hierarchy to get to one small bit, make a tweak, go all the way up to the top again, test if it works. Sometimes you actually need to export the video itself and watch the entire video through. If that was a way of testing it, I remember that being a thing a long time ago, don't know if it still is. Because, you know, what if you needed to use movie symbols for something? Those don't actually play on the root timeline, so you have to do an export if you're going to test that bit. So back in Harmony once again. First of all, you may be wondering what happened to the huge cluster mess of layers that have slowly built up throughout the course of these videos, and well, they're not gone. This is one of the advantages of the node network. You can see the huge cluster mess is still sitting there, but you can tell the camera to look through different viewpoints. So I am now looking through this display here and not display 2. So I can get a very clean interface. It's essentially like working with an empty file, I suppose, but all of the other assets remain. So, new layer. I will draw the same sort of hand up like that. I didn't draw it as well as the other one, but whatever. Rather than making another keyframe, I just expand this all the way out. Okay, so the Harmony method of creating the tween with clench fist in one, instead of a symbol, we use a peg. It's another way of nesting drawings inside of something that is dedicated to movement. So this is a peg button. I hit that and you see it's kind of dropped down inside, and I create the keyframe at the start, and at the finish the tween has been generated, and I can pick up using some movement tools. You see the pivot point appears here, but I can move it whenever I want. Isn't that fun? I'll move that up there and the tween has appeared and begun. The whole thing is a little bit high up, however, but using this animation switch I can turn that off and it will move the entire block of stuff independent of what any keyframes tell it to do. So now I want to be able to create the fist clench stuff. So down on the drawing here, I can hit duplicate drawing. You see the split has appeared, and now I can begin animating the fist clench just as we did before. Now as I begin, of course, this time the tween and the fist clench are happening together. This can be a bit of a problem because if you're in betweening and the object is moving away, well, that sucks, doesn't it? But I can kind of get that inside symbol effect by simply turning the peg off, and the whole thing snaps back to its original position right where I initially drew it. And off we go. Now, just like the other animation, there's a little bit of a clenching fist. When I turn the peg back on, it will do it all at once. So you can see it is all together on one root timeline. I don't need to drill up and down. I can expand and look at the entire animation all stacked up on top of each other. I think this is a very, very nice method. It's built very deliberately to work this way. You can have pegs inside pegs if you want, but it doesn't matter. Regular symbols do exist, and they do inhabit their own independent timeline. If there's occasions that you still want to do that, I think it's still important for when you want to have little loopy stuff that kind of just loop in the background and do all that hoo-ha. But yes, that was worth showing, right? Yeah, I think that was worth showing. So outside of the main added features, there's a handful of things I still want to talk about. Some of them are nitpicky, and I'll admit that, so gauge for yourself what those are and if it's really worth complaining about or not. And others are things I'm assuming will get added to the program eventually, but frankly, they should have been there for a long time ago. But I'm going to give Adobe the benefit of the doubt because they do seem to be sorting it out, and I think we can expect to see some of these features in the future. But as of this video, they have not. The first is a lack of camera. There is still no camera tool in the program at all. There is a workaround that's always been there. As I've mentioned before, the community made a thing called VCam, which codes a vector rectangle to act as a viewfinder. But of course, that cannot compare to Harmony's built-in camera, which works in full 3D space. You can see these are the circles that we made earlier. Moving left and right, it keeps parallax. I can move past them and it goes past them and through them and all that kind of stuff. Very, very handy tool. The camera is used all the time. It can be animated just like any other shape, and something that these days I believe is fundamentally important. Another of these is the stage borders. Once you start putting some backgrounds and full scenery into your Flash or your Animate videos, you start to not see where the borders of your animation lie. Do you see, as I'm adding in these strokes, you can't see where the stage is anymore. And if I was to make something that was bigger than the whole screen, you simply won't even know where you're coming and going. The workaround that people like to use is to add in the rulers and pull 4 of them out that line up approximately with the edge of the stage. These things sit above your drawings and allow you to see what you're doing, even when there's stuff everywhere. I'll add in another big square now, and we can see past the ruler lines, and no matter what we add, we confidently know where the edge of the stage is. But we shouldn't need to do this. This shouldn't be something that we have to think about. It should be automatic. Like in Harmony, here is the edge of the camera. Here is lots of stuff around the edges. I can still see what I'm doing. It's a camera, it's how it works. In fact, this literally is the edges of the camera. When I select the camera to move it around, notice it highlights yellow so I can move it around. So this also means you can have more than one camera in the scene at the same time, focused on different elements, and switch between them accordingly. The third is a thing called Keyframe Caddy. I don't have it on this version of Animate CC, but what it does is it allows you to see every frame inside of a symbol, so you can do things like lip sync and facial expressions, reusable drawings that get used a lot, positions of a hand, etc, etc. The way Harmony answers this problem is under the library tab. This is where things like symbols and any kind of saved drawings get held. So this layer holds some of those vertical dumb strokes I was doing before, but notice here, keep your eye on this slider as I move. See how it goes through the drawings that we've made. How I should really demonstrate this is with a new layer going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 like this, and I can slide through them and choose any given drawing on any given frame. This is an incredibly useful technique and makes lip syncing an absolute breeze, and it's built in, which is good. This is a nitpicky one, and if you've been using Flash for a long time, you wouldn't even notice that this is an issue, but I'm hoping that it's something Adobe sorts out as they continue forwards. Now in Harmony, you have a tool properties panel, right? Each tool you select, it will change its controls according to the tool that you have. Now, Adobe Animate has this as well. There's a properties panel, and as I choose different tools, it will adjust what gets displayed in it depending on what I'm doing. Now, the two problems I have with the properties panel is, one, it doesn't always show you information that you need. So this is the pencil tool one, and this is the brush tool one. Notice it adds in controls for the brush, but the stroke controls are still here, only they're grayed out. Why? You can't control, brushes aren't made of strokes. Having this here is only going to confuse people who are new to the program. Additionally, other controls do get added down on the Tools panel. As you notice as I go between some of these, underneath the fill and stroke color choosing area, buttons get added and move around depending on what kind of tool I have selected. So with the brush tool, I can also get to the size and the shape. This is also where we activate the pressure sensitivity if you're using a tablet. Why are these controls here? They should be here inside of properties. That just makes sense. Again, if you're new to the program and you tell them, customizing tools and controls happens under properties, why would they look here? This is only going to confuse them. It took me ages the first time 10 years ago to figure out how to get a tablet to do stuff. I should be able to find that button inside of properties. I know it's nitpicky, but it's a valid point. Why? Another nitpicky one is the lack of being able to merge layers. Maybe you've not really encountered this problem before, but if you are an avid Photoshop user, you may merge your layers all the time. So it's nice to know that Harmony is indeed capable of exactly that. You can start preparing characters and sketches across 2 different layers to keep things free and independent of one another. And then, if necessary, select both of them and combine them into one. So now those are all there. That is a great thing. Personally, I can't live without it. It is worth pointing out, I don't know how long this has been a thing, but now moving the vectors around happens live. I think this looks really, really nice, being able to pick up these corners and manipulate the shapes of stuff and see how it does, because I don't know how long that's been a thing. You can let me know if you really want, but back in the CS4 days, see how it just shows a line and then it updates later. So that's really nice to see, along with what I was saying about the vector brushes being able to manipulate live as well. And gotta say, Harmony does not do this. Notice as I manipulate the edges on these shapes that it works the way it did in CS4. It shows a preview line and then snaps to it afterwards. So I think Adobe Animate has really done a nice job with being able to demonstrate that stuff in real time. There are a couple of features that Harmony simply does not have, which Adobe Animate does. The biggest miss, I believe, for Harmony is the lack of Align and Distribute tools. This is the Align and Distribute panel in Adobe Animate. It's a very handy function and exists across many of the Adobe line. As you select shapes, you can use it to align things and distribute things. It's a very simple feature, but it is incredibly handy, especially if you're making any kind of interface, anything graphical, digital, all that lot. Everything can be aligned into a grid-like texture very, very easily. Now, Harmony does not have this capability at all, which personally I find very frustrating, as a big part of my job is creating graphical interfaces, and I have to do it all by eye. This is very time-consuming and frankly unnecessary that it must be done this way. The closest answer to it is this grid. Now, its dimensions are a little bit skew, however. You'll notice that they aren't perfect squares, so when it comes to creating grids or things that are perfectly diagonal, etc., it may not be the handiest tool there is. When making lines and moving them all around, as I was in the Animate version, there is a variety of snapping options to be able to connect stuff to the grid, etc., but I consider it to be borderline useless because although it does snap to the grid, you see how it's got that little blue circle there going to the different grid points? It only snaps from where you pick it up, which is kind of pointless. You would want it to be able to snap directly from the end of a shape to the edge of the grid. Otherwise, things are still going to be a little bit misaligned. As you can see, the edge of these brush strokes are not perfectly in sync with one another. Where this is the most damaging is when it comes to creating something that rotates. Here is a circle. I want to tween it rotating around in a circle, right? So I set up keyframes as one would, and the rotate point is here. Now, despite the circle of rotation being exactly the right size, there's no way at all to actually make it snap to the center of a shape. So I need to do it by eye, and even if I'm just a little bit off, it's going to be noticeably rotating around a point that is not the dead center, right? You know, it'll appear wobbly, not spinny. Again, there's workarounds to things like this. If you create the circle straight from the middle of the grid, then it will work just fine. But this shouldn't be necessary. The Align panel is a very fundamental piece. For Toon Boom to be as advanced as it is and to not have that is frankly absurd. The one other big thing that Harmony misses out on, which Flash has been all over forever, is of course the incorporation of a coding language. Yes, with Flash, of course, we all know that you can create interactive content and even games with it, and people have built entire industries out of making games with Flash. So what do you do if you're thinking of migrating to Harmony's animation techniques, but you are unable to apply code to it? Well, the answer to this was heavy integration with the Unity engine. Harmony's built in such a way that things can be exported directly to Unity. There's an armature system built inside, so the legs and the skeletons and all that kind of stuff will work in Unity just fine. Personally, I've not used any of this yet, so I can't really speak for how good it is, but from the direction that game making and stuff is going, being able to release the games through an engine that goes on Steam and all that, as opposed to just SWF, you know, I think they've made a smart move going in that direction. The coding language that Flash has is an extremely powerful one, and people have done some incredible things with it. But if you're thinking of getting into Flash over Toon Boom for that very reason, I feel like I need to say it's too late. It was a huge, booming economy 10 years ago, and it was a fantastic medium that I'll truly miss. But unfortunately, there just isn't much for it anymore. Everything that supported SWFs is slowly starting to convert itself to video, because that's the only way that it can be compatible with, you know, every mobile device and tablet and all that kind of stuff. So if you really had your heart set on making games with animation software, I think they're probably both as good as one another. There was a time where having the art and the code tools all wrapped up in one program was just like the best thing in the world, but we're living in a time now where I don't think it's as necessary. It's not bad that it's a thing, but it doesn't make it superior either. Now I should talk about HTML5 real quick, because that's kind of where things have been heading for Flash and Adobe Animate for quite some time. Flash's native language has always been in ActionScript, but it is fairly compatible with HTML5, and a lot of web developers have been using the Flash platform to create their HTML5 bits, and it is quite good at doing that. I'm not sure what the future of this will be. Being able to create the artwork in the same environment will no doubt be good, but the more I'm hearing, the more people are creating their interactive web elements with a more direct route, rather than going through a piece of software like this. But it's certainly not my field, so there's not really anything I can say about it with any authority or confidence, you know. I've been experimenting with some of my old Flash files, importing them into the new version, and kind of just mucking around, seeing what does and does not survive well into the new era. The first thing I noticed is ActionScript 2 is no longer compatible, no longer a thing at all. I think that's been the case for a little while now, but if you're one of the ones thinking of finally upgrading from Flash 7 or 8, keep in mind that your old code will not work, and anything with code in it will simply snap back to its original position and behave as if there were nothing there. I also seem to encounter this issue as well. I'm not sure what these boxes mean, if they are warning me about the lack of ActionScript compatibility or something, but I don't know. As you can see, with every action I try to do, these boxes keep appearing, and there's like a dozen of them or so each time. I have to keep tapping them all away, one action, tapping them all away again. So it seems ActionScript 2 files are not something you want to be opening at all. I also tried exporting MOVs and videos from Animate at this time using these same old files, and noticed that the visuals are very smooth. This is actually working quite well. However, again, if you have ActionScript in there, I'm not sure if this is simply ActionScript 2 stuff or if ActionScript 3 would be affected as well, but notice how VCam is not working. It's just appearing as a transparent square. As well as things like this video originally had music just playing on the title screen at the very beginning, which is now playing on loop throughout the entire movie. So general consensus here is, if you're making something with no code in it at all, it should export just fine. If it has ActionScript 3, I think it works, but don't quote me on it. You might have to do a bit of research there. So have a look in the comments and see if anyone has done those experiments, but ActionScript 2 is something to avoid. Exporting as video and exporting as movie, why are both of them there? Aren't they the same thing? No, they are not the same thing at all. Exporting movie means the classic SWF, whereas a video means as a proper, well, modern video format. But it's great that this is now working as well as it is. From the extent of my testing, it seems to be fine. Will this put an end to Swivel? I don't know. I'm hearing some opinions that is something to hang on to, just in case. Also at this time, I tried importing an SWF. This was a great feature back in the day is it allowed you to kind of study up and practice different animation techniques, because you could find an animation of someone that you really liked and thought was quite good. You could download their SWF and then simply open it in Flash, and you could see all of the symbols and how the whole video was kind of crafted together, and it was a great way to learn. This was eventually removed from Flash entirely. Maybe they were trying to defend against some sort of piracy or something, I don't know. But for practical purposes, importing SWFs is usually quite vital to many people's workflow. Having it gone seemed quite ridiculous. Fortunately, it is now back. And from all the testing I did, it seems to work just as well as it always did. Now, if you're having a hard time deciding which of these softwares is best for you, I must say, based on what has been demonstrated here, I do believe Harmony to be worth your time more. Now, as you ask around the internet and get people's opinions, Flash and I guess now Adobe Animate is the more popular choice, as it has more of a history behind it, and it is what most experienced internet animators are familiar with. The general consensus to go along with that is that the Flash interface and the way of going about things is generally, apparently, a bit easier to pick up, whereas the Toon Boom stuff isn't very user-friendly and can be a lot more difficult. Now, I respectfully disagree with this opinion. I've taught a lot of people now from a lot of different backgrounds, both through this channel and in real life professionally with colleagues and all that kind of stuff, and I've noticed a distinctive pattern that those who are coming from a Flash background tend to struggle quite a bit because they've been using a particular workflow for years and years and years, and completely changing that setup is like learning a new language, very, very difficult. But if they're animating for the first time, they're able to get their head around using the Toon Boom stuff within, sometimes even less than a day. There's a video probably appearing on a card or an annotation now that goes to a very, very simple introduction on how Harmony works. It's called How to Start Using Harmony in like 4 minutes. Because all you need is a brush and a timeline. It's very, very simple, and the frame structure and how you start generating movement I believe to be a lot more straightforward and requires a lot less steps and a lot less things to memorize than Flash has ever had, because you literally just start drawing on a frame, go to the next frame, and then start drawing again. It is as simple as working with like a flip book, And then all the other features you can start to learn as you start to feel more comfortable and confident and just work at your own pace. And again, that's what all my videos are here for, is to help make learning those deeper features a bit of a smoother process as well. And as you begin to learn those deeper features and you see how tweening works and setting up keyframes and making all kinds of computer-generated motion as opposed to the hand-drawn motion, you will realize that Harmony speaks a very similar language and has a very similar way of presenting itself to you to most other animation softwares out there, particularly motion graphics and 3D programs. To tell a little story on this, I was a Flash animator for almost a decade, a really long time, and I tried learning both Blender and After Effects in that time. So one's a motion graphics program, one's a 3D program. And both of them kicked my ass really bad because I was used to the way Flash set things up. You would typically work with nested symbols, you would create keyframes to station both new drawings and positions of movement and then link them up with tweens. Whereas these other programs spoke very differently. You could get down to the individual parameters and move things all around. Now, Flash has added similar ways of working since then, but it's always been a little bit strange because it couldn't drop the old way. So it needed to have some kind of strange amalgamation of both, which is what we now see as motion tweens and classic tweens, right? So anyway, back on point. After sort of giving up on those programs a little bit and moving on, I came back to them after figuring out how Harmony worked. And suddenly, both After Effects and Blender seemed quite straightforward. It was almost the same interface, only, a button would be in a different place on the screen with a different picture. But the fundamentals were very, very similar. And this is an incredible thing because Flash is just kind of weird. It's its own thing off in space, whereas every other program is kind of, having an understanding of one another. I feel rambly saying this, but I think it's true. Following on from that, because all of these programs can be worked at on a professional level, right? If you ever were thinking of taking this beyond a hobby and pursuing it for an income, a job, professionally, whatever, Harmony is the industry standard when it comes to film and TV. Having experience in Harmony will very likely give you an upper hand and a leg up an arm and a leg, if you will, above the other potential employees. In most animation colleges and schools, they're still only teaching Flash. I believe that status quo is beginning to change and more classes are starting to teach Harmony now, but if you can get in on that train early, you're going to find yourself having a much easier time when talking to studios and getting interviews and being able to prove yourself as someone who's worth having. So at last, we reach our conclusion. Thank you for sticking with me for all this time. Do you think I should have called this Animate vs Toon Boom the movie? Maybe not, but I'd like to conclude similar to how all this began. Adobe Animate CC does seem to be much improved over Flash. Asking around and getting the opinions of different animators, it reveals that their feelings differ greatly. Some love the updates, some have avoided updating for various reasons entirely, and others downright hate it, thinking it even worse than the versions of Flash that came before it, thinking that this was the one chance to get it right, and in their point of view, blew it entirely, thus being the final straw in some cases. Personally, however, I do think this is an improvement over Flash. However, it still cannot come close to that of Harmony Essentials, the lowest and least powerful in the Toon Boom lineup. Harmony Advanced takes things much further again, as I demonstrated with things like Precious Sensitive Pencil, and several things that I didn't show, like the bitmap layers. And finally, somewhat needless to say, Harmony Premium leaves everything else for dead. Now, although I went on for a good couple of hours, I covered most of what Animate can do, but I didn't even come close to covering everything that the 3 different versions of Toon Boom Harmony are capable of. If you want to see a clearer explanation of what is in the 3 separate versions, I encourage you to check out the playlist link in the description titled Harmony 12. It takes you through what is and isn't in the 3 different versions, help you get a grip of what it contains. So finally, in summary, is Adobe Animate CC good? Yes, but it does have issues, and unfortunately many of the new features that have been added are quite rough around the edges. In some cases are not even worth your while, but with the addition of, I think, tagged swatches and the colored onion skin, those 2 in particular put it on the right track. If you are a Toon Boom user already and you're thinking of migrating back, I don't think it's a wise move, to be honest. You're just losing out on a whole bunch of stuff and it would be setting you back productivity-wise. However, that being said, all these programs do have free trial periods, so you got nothing to lose by giving anything a go. So I encourage you to investigate both and come to your own conclusions and maybe discuss it in the description below. I look forward to hearing everyone's opinion. I apologize if I slandered anybody's favorite program or features. I tried to be as neutral as possible, sorry if it didn't come across that way, but when simply laying things down on the line, there are many things where one program simply shines above the other. So thank you again for your time and your patience sitting this all the way through to the end. You're a wonderful audience and I consider it a privilege to have you all tuning in. You're all so supportive of everything that I've done so far, and I look forward to all the things we have to make in the future. So I hope you got something out of this 2-hour long review. Have some fun, and I'll see you in the next one.